Hello, my name is Quentin Blake. I'm an illustrator. I've been doing that for about more than 50 years, in fact, and a lot of that time I've been doing illustrations for books, and in particular for children's books. I've illustrated all the books by Roald Dahl except one, like Matilda and the BFG and the Twits and Ezio Trot. Those are all books I've illustrated. I've illustrated books of my own, Clown, Zagazoo. There's one I did a long time ago called Mr. Magnolia, which you can still see. And I've illustrated books by a number of other writers, like John Yeoman and Michael Rosen and Joan Aiken. And I'm still at work, so who knows who I might not be drawing for next. Well, I've been doing illustration for 50 years, and in fact sometimes people say to me, you must get bored, but in fact it gets more interesting, and I think it's because there's something that's more to be found. That is, I started off simply by drawing things that were happening, the things that were happening in the story, so that the text is interesting, and it's full of things to draw. But what I've realized later on is that it's also very interesting where the pictures go in the book, for instance, or how they relate to the text, or what the whole atmosphere of the book is, or how many pictures there are and where they come. So there's a whole lot of elements involved in it, and what the people who are looking at the pictures, what the readers and spectators, how they are going to react. So in a way, it gets more interesting rather than less interesting, and of course the more books you do, the more books you discover to do. So I'm not bored yet anyway. One thing that's very interesting to me is to try and tell people that illustration isn't kind of a weak form of painting. It's really something rather different. Any art like this is, any visual art, almost any art is some kind of self-expression in that part of you is in it. That's the way that you make it the way it is. But illustration is also like producing a play or playing a string quartet or something like that. It's actually an art of interpretation, so that it's the way of getting the words and the pictures to work together, or even sometimes just to do the whole thing in pictures. So it is, but what you do is coloured by the text that you're starting from. If you're reading someone's novel, reading someone's story, you actually have to bathe yourself in it. I think you have to be immersed in it and read it quite a lot before you start to draw. And then, I mean, my way of drawing is quite recognisable, but at the same time I can modify it in different ways. And so I've done some stories which are slightly more realistic, others which are more like caricature. And while you're rehearsing the book, you're trying to decide exactly where that line is drawn, how serious it is, how humorous it is, how naturalistic it is, and try to match the spirit of the book itself. That's one of the things that, since you don't know what the next book is going to be, it's one of those things that makes it continuously interesting, because you think you know how you do this job, and then you get a new story, a new text, a new writer, and you realise you don't know, and you have to start again pretty well from the beginning. Well, I'm lucky in that people tell me they can recognise my drawings. In fact, someone said that their 2.5-year-old son could recognise them without being told who they were by. So that's fortunate, but I didn't do that. I didn't do that on purpose. It was something that I discovered when I was about, I don't know, 22, 23, something like that. It became idiosyncratic, and it became like handwriting. I think it's an enormous advantage, but it isn't. I mean, somebody wrote to me once, a student, and said, it was very shrewd of you to adopt this style because it's identifiable, but I didn't adopt it on purpose. I just found a way of drawing that seemed to suit me. But I think I've had a lot of advantage from it because it is identifiable, That's one thing about it. I think also because it's informal. I think the young people looking at it don't feel it's threatening. They always feel they could do it themselves, and they often say, "Well, we're trying to draw like you," and so on and so on. So it's informal, and I think that's an advantage. It makes it easier to approach it. I've no idea at all what people later on will think about what I've done. And in fact, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. What I'm thinking about is what the next project might be. But I hope that I'll have some sort of a place in a history of illustration. And really, I would like people to think what I think when I'm looking at the people I admire. And that is that they worked with writers, they had something of their own to say, and that, I don't know, I just like to think, when I'm looking at somebody else's work, I think, oh, they knew what they were doing. And if people thought that about me, that'd be fine.